All right, let's just jump right in. Today, we're going on an epic adventure into the yeasty, gassy, and honestly, surprisingly dramatic science of how bread rises. If you've ever baked a loaf of bread, you probably think of it as this calm, cozy, quiet activity. But on a microscopic level, it is an absolute hero's journey. Because we really have to ask, why exactly does bread rise? Like, how does this sad, dense little lump of dough magically transform into a fluffy, airy, golden loaf? Well, I'll tell you right now, it isn't magic. And it's definitely not just flour, water, and good vibes. There is a deeply intricate biological narrative unfolding inside literally every single batch. And it all starts with our main character, yeast. To quote the absolute truth of the matter, it's a living, breathing fungus. Now, I know it might be kind of hard to emotionally bond with a single-cell microorganism, but make no mistake, yeast is the absolute party animal of the microbial world. Once you activate it, you are waking up millions of tiny, incredibly hungry organisms that are just ready to get to work. Now, I know we're treating this like a fun little narrative today, but this is serious science. I mean, describing the biochemistry of bread making is literally a rigorous 7-mark question on university-level industrial biochemistry exams. That simple loaf sitting on your kitchen counter, yeah, it's actually a marvel of biochemical engineering. But before our fungal protagonists even arrive on the scene, bakers have to set the stage. They use a technique called an autolyse. Basically, this is a dedicated rest period right after mixing just the flour and water together. No yeast, no salt yet. This lets the flour fully absorb the water and the starches and proteins start to align. It creates this perfectly hydrated environment for all the crazy action that's about to follow. Okay, so once the yeast actually joins the party in that hydrated dough, the main event kicks off: fermentation. Our tiny fungal party animals aggressively start feeding on all the available sugars in the dough, using their enzymes to break them down. They are devouring those carbohydrates like it's a massive diet cheat day. And, well, just like anyone who eats way too much way too fast, they start to release some byproducts. This microscopic feast basically happens in 3 clear steps. Step 1, the yeast eats the sugars, stuff like glucose and fructose. Step 2, they essentially burp out carbon dioxide gas. And step 3, they produce a little bit of alcohol. Yep, your bread dough is literally fermenting, getting slightly tipsy before it ever hits the oven. And those fungal burps of carbon dioxide, that is the exact gas we need to inflate our dough. But wait, here's the catch. All that glorious gas would just float right up and disappear into your kitchen if there wasn't something there to catch it, right? Enter flour's special protein tag team, glutenin and gliadin. When these 2 proteins combine with water, they form gluten, and gluten is the unsung hero that gives bread its entire structure. Gluten is basically an incredibly stretchy, elastic network inside the dough. Think of it like a microscopic bouncer at a club, or maybe a really ambitious spider web. When the yeast burps out that CO2, the gluten web catches it and traps it, so the dough inflates instead of just popping. And as bakers physically knead the dough, they're forcing more glutenin and gliadin to bump into each other. This makes that elastic network stronger and way more capable of holding onto those expanding gas bubbles. After all that intense mixing and kneading, the dough needs to chill, spiritually and sometimes literally. This stage is called proofing. The dough basically just sits around and puffs up as the yeast continuously produces gas, and the gluten stretches out to accommodate it all. It is this super delicate balancing act between the gas being produced and the dough's ability to actually contain it. And bakers actually use some really specific gear to manipulate this delicate proofing stage. If they want to speed things up, they might toss it in a warm, humid dough proofer. But if they want a slow rise to develop really complex sour flavors, they'll use a cold dough retarder, which is essentially a fridge that lets flavor-producing bacteria thrive. Then, to actually support the soft dough as it expands, they'll shape it in wicker baskets called bannetons, or use these flour-dusted linen cloths called coaches. Finally, the resting phase is over. The shaped, perfectly inflated dough is placed into the hot oven for the climax of its journey. And let me tell you, things immediately get wild. The environment changes from this cozy, warm room to an absolute inferno. And this triggers a rapid, unstoppable chain of physical and chemical reactions inside the loaf. That sudden, intense heat triggers something bakers call oven spring. This is a dramatic final growth spurt. The yeast, reacting to the rapidly rising temperature, just goes completely nuts. It throws one final massive party, producing gas at maximum speed. At the exact same time, the gases that are already trapped inside those gluten bubbles rapidly expand in the heat. This forces the dough to stretch and puff up to its absolute physical limits. But, this intense heat also brings our story to a bit of a tragic climax, because as the temperature becomes just too much to handle, our microscopic heroes, the yeast, die off. It is a tragic but very noble fungal end, because as they perish, they leave behind this magnificent legacy. The alcohol they produced completely evaporates away, and the heat causes that stretchy gluten network to firmly set in place. Your gooey, gassy dough transforms into a permanent, solid, springy loaf. Now, while the inside is firming up, a completely different kind of magic is happening on the outside. It's called the Maillard reaction. People actually confuse this with caramelization all the time, but they are totally different. Caramelization is just the breakdown of sugars under heat. The Maillard reaction, that is a complex chemical dance between amino acids and reducing sugars. They are entirely distinct processes. This high-heat Maillard reaction happens incredibly fast, usually between 140 and 165 degrees Celsius. It creates these brown polymers called melanoidins, which basically act like a perfect golden brown graduation gown for your bread. And not only does it create that beautiful, crusty exterior, but it also produces literally hundreds of unique, complex flavor and aroma compounds. It is the exact reason a bakery smells so overwhelmingly incredibly good. So the bread finally comes out, it cools down, and you get to take a bite. And right at that moment, you actually step into the story as the final character. You are engaging in a very specific branch of food science called psychorheology. Yes, there is literally an entire scientific term dedicated to the sensory judgment of how a food physically feels inside your mouth. Psychorheology measures the consistency and the mechanical flow of the food as you chew it. That bouncy, airy volume that was preserved by the baked gluten network, that crispy resistance of the mired brown crust, those specific properties completely dictate what the industry calls consumer acceptability. In plain English, all that complex biochemistry and physics directly determines whether or not that slice of bread actually feels satisfying for you to eat. So the next time you throw together a simple sandwich, I have to ask, are you gonna look at your bread the same way? Take just a second to appreciate the heroic, alcohol-fueled microbial rager that took place to make it happen. Think about the tiny fungi that feasted, the gluten that stretched, and the intense inferno that transformed a dense lump of flour into a literal culinary miracle. Science really does taste amazing, doesn't it?